Good evening, everyone. This is Mike, just stopping in for a second. I wanted to thank Frank Klepacki one more time from the bottom of my heart and John's for doing this interview with us. It means so much to us. I know myself personally, as I mentioned in the interview, his music has helped shape my childhood in terms of video game music and being inspired to create myself and to write things myself. So he's one of the bucket list items on my list to be able to talk to. And I thank him very much. He was very gracious to do this for us. He was such a nice guy to talk to. We encourage all of you to please visit his website, frankklepacki.com. He does have a majority of his works up to stream, and you can purchase them. So I do highly, highly encourage you all to do that. He's one of the heavy hitters in the industry, and without him, the landscape of video games would not be the same. So without further ado, here is the chipsgrooveradio podcast interview with Frank Klepacki. Enjoy. You've tuned in to the chipsgrooveradio podcast with hosts Mike and John. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Just busy. Literally just going from one thing to the next.
Not a problem. Well, I'm Mike. Here's my buddy John, and we do a podcast called The Chips Groove, and it is a dedication to video game soundtracks because I personally I wanted to do this because I want to celebrate the music of video games and, kind of give them their due. I don't feel like they get enough attention. So that's kind of where I'm at with this.
Awesome. I enjoy your backdrop of games there.
Oh yeah.
I kind of recognize.
Had to bring them out. Yes. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction. This is the Chips Groove podcast. I'm your host, Mike, here with John, as always. And we do have a guest today. A veritable giant in the video game industry, audio director at Petroglyph Games, and composer of games such as Command & Conquer, Dune 2, Star Wars, Empire at War, and many more.
Many, many more.
Frank Klepacki.
Hello.
So yeah, this is a great thing for me. This is 30 years in the making. I've been a fan for a while. I wanted to give you this show because it's one of those things where I've been such a fan of your music for so long, and I think music really helps us connect to things in a very specific way. Without music in movies and TV, you wouldn't feel the way you do with it there. So I think it affects video games the same way. And I think you've done that masterfully throughout your career.
Well, thank you very much.
That's why I reached out to you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm glad that you've enjoyed my work all of this time, and 30 years in the making. Jesus, that's pretty much my whole career.
Yeah, I was 8 when I first dipped my toes into Dune 2, so I've been a fan ever since because it definitely keeps you wanting to play.
I'm not quite as long of term as fan. 28 years, Command & Conquer for me.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, certainly right up there. No, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it much.
Yeah, let's just jump right in with some basic stuff. I know you grew up with music a lot. What was it like having a family of musicians, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting because even though I don't have the earliest of these memories, my parents reminded me that when I was really little and just being around it all the time, I kind of took it for granted, just like, oh yeah, everybody's parents does this, right? So, so after a while, it sunk in that, oh, okay, well, what they do is, something special, and not everybody does that. And eventually, I got the bug to want to play an instrument. I just kind of needed to figure out what that was going to be. And so, as you can obviously see behind me, there's a drum there.
Oh yeah,
that was my, beginnings. That was the instrument of choice that I started with, because after trying as an 8-year-old, trying guitar and bass and other instruments, I was like, this is kind of hard, and it's too hard to wrap my hand around this thing and get calluses and all that stuff. So I was like, oh, drums must be easy. Just beat the crap out of those, right? So started on that, and my parents, fortunately for me, gave me some rules to follow. They're like, okay, you want a drum kit, we'll do that, but the thing is you got to take lessons for a whole year. After that, you can decide to quit if you want, but you have to commit to a year. And I'm like, okay. So did that, ended up loving it, of course, and became a professional at a very young age, and the rest is history. As I gravitated towards other instruments in my high school years, it was out of a need to basically communicate with bandmates. When I wanted to write or contribute to original music and original songs, that was a hang up because I didn't speak the language. Like,
yeah,
right.
I got an idea. It goes, and they're looking at me like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so eventually I picked up guitar and started to learn it, and then keyboards a bit to start to learn it. And that way I could at least, say, hey, it's in this key and this is the riff. And, I could actually speak the language. So that was how that got started. And then, of course, that led into me actually becoming more of a composer, because I was always practicing and trying to come up with ideas at home. So one thing kind of led itself into another. Same thing with recording, recording in studios for the first time, and watching the engineer and learning from him and figuring out how to do stuff on my own that way. And, integrate that with computers and video games, and just, it all starts to come together.
That's awesome. Just kind of snowballed.
Must have been interesting back before you could just Google everything, where you had to figure out how to build an engineering studio and how to get that all hooked up.
Yeah, back then you had to actually rely on word of mouth and expertise from other people.
Yeah.
And you just had to kind of be very trusting in that. You didn't have the opportunity to try a lot of things out unless you happened to be somewhere that had it, or there wasn't a big luxury that way. So that was definitely a different way of being able to learn. You had to physically be there and physically talk to people, and go to the places that you needed to see the gear or hear it or find it or buy it or find it used if you were lucky, through an ad in the paper, not online, like all of that around. So yeah, that was humble beginnings, but that was how things were done. And fortunately, I just had the persistence to go through those trial and errors and soak up information like a sponge, and figure out what I was doing wrong or what I was thinking about wrongly, or how I could adjust that and continue to evolve.
Sounds like you had that composer mindset from a very young age. Like you wanted to show people how to make a song or make a riff, and you had to go however you had to do it. You go about it. You did it. Must have had that drive to be a composer. Was it difficult sometimes? Some people didn't take to it, especially if you were a drummer and you're coming up with these ideas. Was it difficult to get that across sometimes?
It really wasn't once I got to a point where I could play well enough and record well enough to submit ideas to people and communicate that. And the bands I was in, they came around to the idea that, oh yeah, okay, Frank's really contributing or really writing stuff, and we need to sort this out so we can learn what he's coming up with, and also bounce back ideas at him and contribute other riffs that might complement that. And it was a good give and take, especially in the band context. I was very big into doing that with rock bands that I was playing in, or funk bands that I was playing in. And but when it came to applying that towards video game music, that was a whole different animal. When I first got started, everything was sort of in its infancy still, and making the transitions into, better technology, in a very quick pace. Like first game I worked on was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And so that was my entry level into composing music for video games. And that's very limited. You had, three monophonic FM synthesis channels to work with on the NES, and so you had a bass line, a melody, a harmony, and a white noise snare drum, and that was all you got, So and I thought that was, this is easy enough, I can handle that, because I was already programming in basic code on my Tandy 1000, for anybody who remembers those back in the day, and making music playback out of it that way. So then I just started learning the tools at Westwood Studios. Audio director put in front of me, said, hey, this is what we're using to do stuff. So I learned it, got into it, and made it happen. But it wasn't long after that I was, okay, now we're into the PC games, and we're using the ad-lib card and the Sound Blaster card, the very early one. And again, it's FM synthesis, but now it's 16-bit, and now it's, you're able to make your own instruments and have a little bit more channels. We had like 6 channels to work with, because 3 of them needed to be for sound effects. Just all of these technical things. So there's still limitations, but it gets a little bit better.
It's a little bit better,
a little looser.
So then I programmed the hell out of that, and Dune 2 was really kind of the first major score I did, taking full advantage of what those cards do, in every aspect. So I really took my time, just programming the hell out of it to just constantly change things in the background, so that it kept the songs interesting, tempos, dynamics, instrument changes, it was just always happening to make up for the lack of channels. And then of course we had access to the old Roland MT32 module, then the early Sound Canvas module, and so we were supporting those, so you could get better synthesized playback. Other games were taking advantage of that at the time, and so we were doing that as well. And it was just rapid. I mean, just not long after we were using that, then all of a sudden, now there's new Sound Blaster cards with WAV file playback, and we can use that for voice, use it for drums, or same thing with the Sega Genesis. It was very much the same technology. Moving on to the Super Nintendo, we could sample every channel if you wanted to, and again, very limited capacity of memory and things like that, but it was just every year I felt like we were having to learn a new system and a new set of parameters to utilize.
Yeah, it was one of those time periods where things were progressing so fast. I feel like nowadays everything's just there for you. There's not a lot of, there is development, but it's all pretty much available for everyone. And I can imagine going through in the 90s, just picking up anything that was new, that had to have been something you really had to keep up with.
Yeah, there was no school for that sort of thing. You just kind of had to do it. You had to, commit to the job and, learn on the job. But, that was the only way to dive into dev kits. You'd get sent, special cartridges and cards and systems that were, prototypes in order to support, development for those systems. And so that's largely what we did. And, and that's still done today, especially with consoles. For PC, obviously everything's available, like you said. All of the engines that most people use now, you can just download them and start messing with it. Need to cost you anything, unless you actually publish something.
Right.
So yeah, it's more about implementation, I feel, these days than anything. Content and quality of the content that is created is pretty much, been the same for quite some time now.
Definitely. So I wanted to ask, is there a small glimpse that you could give us into when you take on a job for a video game? What's your thought process? Do you have a rubric of what you want to accomplish, or do you have to come up with a sound for the game, or do you get direction on that? Like if someone pitches a game to you?
Yeah, it's a collaborative thing. Generally, as soon as I get, started on a project, there's just a lot of meetings initially about what the game is and, how it should feel, what the personality of the game should be is a big thing that I always bring up. That's part of the soundtrack for me, is making the game have a personality. Music is about emotion, but it's also about stylizing the visual. Sound complements that, and so I'm a big proponent of adding some sort of personality to things and trying to figure out what that should be. And sometimes you have multiple personalities within a game. You have different factions, for example. You want to designate a different soundtrack or different themes, at least, to those factions, things like that. And writing something that will not only complement the gameplay, but be impactful for the experience. I don't necessarily feel I always hit those marks, but that's something I always strive for, at least. And the fan base of the games that I've worked on, especially Command and Conquer games, those have resonated with people way beyond what I ever expected it to. I remember at the time working on the first one, in even Red Alert, I just felt like we were just experimenting a lot and just having fun with it and trying to see what we could throw to the wall that would stick. And the very first one in particular is a variety of different feels and songs because of the fact of the experimentation. The intention was to see which of these things will fit and which will not. And what ended up happening was everybody's like, yeah, they all kind of sound cool. Let's keep them all in. I was like, okay.
Okay. It makes my job easier.
Yeah. So that was kind of a reason for the diversity of that. And again, I was just very surprised that it was as well received as it was, because to me, I didn't think video game music at that time could be that impactful, that or could be on par with how people feel about their favorite bands or their favorite movie soundtracks or whatever, so like I didn't even put that together. It was just like, this is a fun job, I love what I'm doing, and this is cool that we work on this, and I'm having the best time. But I didn't expect my contribution to resonate that the way that it did. So I was very flattered and taken by that, but I still kind of dismissed it as like, it's just a bunch of diehard. Like, these are like uber gamers that are really into it. Like, it's not really a thing. And Red Alert came out, and of course that soundtrack was a bit more refined and a bit more focused. And that just blew the doors off in terms of, people who appreciated the soundtrack for that game. And I was just completely like blown away by that. I was just like,
I was really curious about that. You went from Command and Conquer, which, like you said, was a bit more of a smorgasbord of kind of techno rock, industrial, and you go to Red Alert, which really, looking at your past and looking at your bands, how much funk is in you, how much funk is in Red Alert and the Red Alert soundtrack. It kind of is dominated by Hell March to some extent, but you have this underlayment of funk between all of the most of the songs. Like Radio and Run. Did it feel like you wanted to put more of your own spin on Red Alert?
I don't know that it was necessarily thinking about putting my own spin on it. I mean, it all comes from what was influencing me at the time, but I think there was more of a focus on giving Red Alert a distinctive personality, right? And that gets back to what I was mentioning before. That was something that I talked about, with my audio director at the time, but also Brett Sperry, who was the president and very involved in the creative process. He was always hitting me up, like, hey, what do you got new that I can listen to? And he was very like into the musical part of it, even though he didn't necessarily speak the musical language of the what goes into creating it. He just knows kind of the things that he wants to listen for, and most of it is like about certain elements or certain feelings or certain instrumentation, and I would try to literally take his words and turn it into something. It's like, no, that's not really what I was going for. And I'm like, so try to figure those things out. But it was definitely a focus on more industrial sounds, definitely more about focused on the synth stuff, the rock stuff, the and ambient tracks as well, to kind of give it some variety that way in terms of just the different feelings that you go through during battle and during gameplay. So I mean, of course the whole thing with Hell March is that became the theme song of the game, so that's why it's become the I think iconic theme that it has over the years. But I have to credit Brett for that too, because I came up with that theme not even knowing what Red Alert was going to be about. Like, I started, they're like, hey, we're going to work on the next Command and Conquer. And I'm like, cool, I've got some ideas, and I started working on a theme that I thought would be for like Nod, right? And that's what March started out as. I mean, I wrote it that way, but so I played it for Brett when he came in, and he's like, yeah, he says, what do you got for me to listen to? And I said, I got this theme. I think it's a cool theme for Nod. He's like, all right, well, let me listen to it. And I played it for him. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, I think this should be the theme song for the game. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah,
That's
but it's
awesome.
not going to be GDI Nod. We're doing this whole like throwback to, World War II and what if, and all of these different, elements we're going to throw in. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. I had no clue. So should I do something different then? And he's like, no. He's like, but just, can we do something that it's not entirely metal? Can we go into like some more of the techno thing or whatever? So that's why halfway through the song, it goes into a techno
It kind of
remix.
fades in.
It fades. Yeah, that's awesome.
And also that complements the gameplay, because when you play that song in the game and it does that, a lot of the other songs, of course, could be either industrial based or synth based or ambient based. And so that gives you a bridge to some of the other themes. It's not always, keeping you in this rock state of mind. But the main theme is, of course, the rock part. And that's what's used for the front end.
That's awesome. It's interesting that it was such a kind of this conception of a song that you didn't even think, you would think it was going to be maybe a sidetrack or whatever. And it's, no, that's perfect. That's the theme song.
That's what we're looking for.
And it's one of the most easy and natural themes that I've ever written. I mean, like I wrote it that day, completed it in one day. Like I woke up with the idea of, writing a song to the sound of marching boots. That's what kicked it off. So then as soon as I got in the office, I got a sample of that and I picked up the guitar. First riff I played was that riff. And then I
that's awesome.
just kept, spiraling after that. Just to get back to another thing you just said earlier, though, about integrating more funk into things. I'm glad you brought that up, too, because funk is, of course, a very, it's my favorite genre of music, really. I mean, as much as I love rock and metal, too, funk is definitely, a notch above that for me in terms of what I gravitate towards. I mean, and so with that in mind, I mean, that is prevalent in, sprinkled throughout different tracks that I work on. Groove, it was important to me, even if it's something heavy, even if it's something that has hybridized styles in it. Why can't it have a baseline funk groove in it of some sort?
Right.
When you get into tracks like, Mud, even, or Workman and stuff like that, those are serious funk songs. And to me, in terms of the groove, and even though, there's other elements on top of that that are not traditionally with, what you expect from that, it's part of, I guess, my sound. I guess, that's something that filters through my brain and how I feel. And that's, I can hear those things working together a bit more naturally, I suppose.
I love it too, because if funk isn't something that you would naturally associate with video games, like maybe like like Jet Set Radio or something, but back in those days, you would say, I'm going to do a funk soundtrack for a video game. It probably wouldn't sell to the developer team, but it's great that they let you kind of play in that space and express your own.
Well, not to mention a game about war, but the way it's integrated is so perfect. Like,
it's great.
The gameplay along with that, and just going about your business and listening to that groove and funk, it's perfect. I love it.
Cool. Thanks. I picked up on that, and I'm glad you enjoy that aspect of it. I certainly do. I mean, it's definitely not something you hear a lot in games, unless it's, a very specific stylized thing. One thing that was kind of cool was, I had a track that was licensed of mine into a video game called Lethal League Blaze. And that was just a very fun arcade, kind of a game that was focused on, more groove and tunes and stuff. And so one of the ones they licensed from me was a track called Decibel, which is a very much the same kind of vibe. It's a funk-based track, but with heavy rock and synth elements on top of it. So
awesome.
All these years later, when you guys were approached to remaster Command and Conquer, I've heard you are a big Star Wars fan.
Oh, yeah.
So having that, we all know the influence of that franchise. Did you feel a sense of accomplishment when 25 years later they're coming back to you and be like, people want you to come back and remake this classic? Did you feel like your work had surpassed a certain milestone? Was that something that meant anything to you, or was it something just kind of next project? I'm excited about it.
The one thing I can say about working on that was the one word that sums it up for me is surreal. That was really because I never thought in a million years I'd be coming back to remaster a game that was 25 years old.
Right.
that was a bit surreal to me. Not only that, but the fact that, since I was audio director on the project, and I'm now going through every single sound effect in that game as well, master it that way too, and you know paying complete homage to the guys that I worked with, my previous audio director Paul Mudra and sound designer Dwight Okahara. Those guys did all of that work, and I was just the composer at the time, even though I would contribute a little bit here and there, voices and stuff. But yeah, those were largely our roles there. So now I'm going back and going through their original work and trying to find all of the elements that they used to put together those sounds so that I can recreate them with high fidelity. And my gosh, that was a serious, that took months of just going through all of these individual sound effect sounds from old libraries, and how do I make where's that sound at? And I did find the majority of them after quite some time, but some of them I had to kind of take liberties and get as close as possible to it with another higher quality sound if the original was still kind of a little bit on the old dated side. And it was just about, I got into a mindset of really wanting to just make it as close to the original as possible, but with just better quality. And I had to do that with the music too. Fortunately, I did find a lot of my original, mixes. So I was able to do a remaster from those. But also there were a handful of tracks that I couldn't find at all.
Really?
Unfortunately. And so I did recreate them from scratch with the original synthesizers that I used in the 90s.
Nice.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Well, it's the only way to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're right.
And for whatever reason, I held on to those pieces of gear, all of these all the time, even though I don't use it, and it's sitting in my closet. They were just sentimental to me for whatever reason, and I was like, okay, well, guess what? I actually have to fire these things up and
that's awesome.
Recreate these tracks. Fortunately, I was able to do that as well. So it was very just surreal to go back and have to relive those games, both of them, CNC and Red Alert, and their expansions. And put it all together again in a higher quality package. And then, of course, on top of that, having the bonus tracks with myself and the Tiberian Sons, that was sort of, that came in a bit later because before I even started working on the remasters, I had already planned the show with those guys, the previous year. And so once we started working on the remaster, I was just like, how ironic is this, the timing of it?
Come on.
So, I told our producer at EA, Jim, I was like, just so you know, I already planned to do a whole CNC show before we even started this, and it's already in the books and da-da-da. So I was like, I hope this isn't like a conflict of interest or anything. It's like, no, that's cool. Go ahead and do that, And then after the show, he said, man, that was so cool. I'd love to figure out a way to, have you guys do your versions of that, as a bonus in the game. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, we can work that out. So came up with a budget and, re-recorded everything that we did live and, put it in there. So, it was an extra additive for that.
That's awesome. Do you think there was any bittersweet feelings of going into the EA office after what they did to Westwood?
No, I have to say no, because they have a completely different change of the guard over there now. I mean, none of the people that were involved with the closure of Westwood are there. So, it was definitely it could not have been a better experience, honestly. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, our producer was the most passionate CNC guy you could have asked for to head up that project, and was great to work with. Very supportive, went out of his way to do a lot for us, and it was just a great great meeting of the minds, and everybody's on the same page, and we all wanted to do the same thing. So it was, in my mind, it was very smooth and a great experience.
It's great to hear that they obviously cared a lot about the Command and Conquer franchise, because it was such an important game, soundtrack, everything to video games, RTS, and specifically. It was good that it was done correctly, because that's a very important game.
And he was also instrumental in getting the fans, the community council involved, which were all the guys that have been around to, keep CNC alive, in the communities and in mods and in the support, and all of that. I mean, like, these guys still to this day care so much about it. And so it was great that not only were they part of, the development process and their feedback, but, some of them even contributed directly. Like, one of the guys even like redid the install videos in high quality.
Oh, wow.
CC Hyper was the guy that did that, and it was nice. It was awesome. And so like, and it was surreal for him because he was a guy that was part of the community, and now he's actually directly contributing to the game. And now I'm lining up my sound design to his work. He's like, dude, Frank's actually doing this.
That's awesome.
So, it was a lot of moments like that, and I got to meet him in person too when I went to Gamescom last year, so that was cool.
Oh, awesome.
Very cool. Now, we know Petroglyph has been busy with a lot of things, and you were not able to do Command & Conquer 3. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. At the time, I believe we were doing a Universe at War, and we were really heavily wrapped up in that. So, one, it would have been, I would have been strapped for time, and two, it would have been kind of a little bit of a conflict in the fact that we're making the same kind of game at the same time. So,
what's it like creating a Star Wars game? I know you're a big fan.
Oh man, I'll geek out all day. I mean, so Star Wars for me, it's still my favorite, movie and series franchise. Always loved it. I never forgot what it was like to be a kid and, appreciate it in that way. Like a lot of us, who grew up, and then had new movies, everybody was, had their complaints about them. And I'm like, guys, you got to shut your brain off, because think about how young you were when the originals came out. It's like, this is the same thing that's happening for kids now. They love these movies now, so, but, all of that aside, best 4 years of development in my career. I was a kid in a candy store the entire time. I could not have asked for a better experience for that either. I mean, everybody at LucasArts that I worked with, all of the back and forth and approvals and sharing of assets and all of that. I mean, I was such a Star Wars fan that I knew all of the sound design, the voices, music like the back of my hand. So you couldn't have asked for a better guy to be in charge of audio for a game for that. And but also the most important thing that I stressed was that I wasn't trying to put my mark on it, because Star Wars is already affiliated with, the great people that created all of those, wonderful assets, music, everything. John Williams is my hero. Ben Burtt's my hero for the sound design. So like, I'm not going to try to put my own thing on this. I'm going to try to just continue, what their style guide was. And so any new sounds that I came up with, I wanted it to feel like it still belonged in the Star Wars makeup of everything. And in the music too, I said, there's no reason for me to score this whole game myself, because it takes place in the, original trilogy, and everybody knows Williams' music is iconic for that. So I'm going to use it where it belongs. But I did contribute new music to new areas that were not part of those films. So other planets, other, more, space battles and things that would happen that weren't specific to, movie events. That's where I decided to contribute music to, and most importantly, blend in. I wasn't trying to stand out. I wanted it to feel like this is an extension of the Williams stuff, and it's in that style, and hopefully people don't notice. That was kind of the, as a fan, that's what I would have wanted as a, to play in this game. So that's how I approached everything that I was contributing.
And I think a lot of people would appreciate that, just on the fan level, where, this sounds more like Star Wars. This guy's not trying to put his stamp on it. So that's actually really authentic. I like that. Yeah.
And like I said, it was just, the best experience. I loved every minute of it. You got to go visit Skywalker Ranch, and,
oh, wow.
Met people there that was awesome. Skywalker Sound, working out of there. I mean, it's all amazing.
Now, did they open their floodgates of SFX for you, or did you have to create most of it by yourself?
No, everything I asked for, they gave me. So,
oh wow, that's awesome.
I got a whole package delivered, and it was like all day I was just like smiling ear to ear. I'm like, that's the Millennium Falcon. Oh my God, there's that. That's the lightsaber.
We got it.
I have all the
Oh, that would
Chewbacca
have been
grunts.
so
This is
fun.
great. So yeah, it was awesome.
Is there a game franchise that you look to compose for or wish you could have? Is there something that has maybe stood out that maybe you wanted to be a part of?
Man, I was a big fan of the Unreal Tournament games.
Mm.
And so that would have been fun to do something with. And I'm a huge Transformers fan, so I'd love to do a Transformers game. The problem is I know the composers for both of those franchises, and I love their work. So why would anybody hire me when they can? But and that's actually kind of another fun, dream come true for me is Vince DiCola is the composer for the Transformers 1986 movie.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he's also composed some stuff for other, Transformers related video games, actually, Transformers Angry Birds, Transformers Devastation. And so he's been a musical hero of mine since then. And I got to meet him in person, through a magazine article interview that I contributed to. And then after that, we started kind of hanging out. And then eventually he invited me to play drums for him. So I'm here playing some of my, favorite music with the guy that composed it, since I was like a kid. And,
Yeah,
That is
now he's a
awesome.
good friend of mine. So that's really awesome. So once again, even though those are franchises I love to be a part of, like, I respect the people that already are. So,
right.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So your career started at Westwood. You started with a couple of Dungeons and Dragons games, AD&D.
Mm-hmm.
You play it all?
Oh yeah, I run a campaign right now.
Oh really?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, yep. I'm totally. I've always been a D&D fan, so working on those games actually was super fun for me too. I remember specifically, I had the Beholder 2. I got to work on that game, and I was just as immersed into the game during development as I was, writing stuff for it. And that was kind of sparsely put into in the game in terms of any soundtrack stuff. Like, it wasn't constant music all the time. You'd have, silence and ambience and just different sounds of the creatures and stuff, that had significant breaks between music. So music was used for like either special events or special levels or things like that. It wasn't constant. And that was kind of nice because it helped give you that sense of immersion into, these, fantasy created levels and lands and stuff. And I was like, the art style was so cool even for back then. We had such talent working at the studio, and I was just in completely always in awe of what was being created. I was just walking around the office, and that's really what drew me to want to work there in the first place. I started there as a tester, and walking around the studio, I felt like I was on the behind the scenes set of a film, or something, but it's for video games,
Right.
I'm like, that's how you do that? Oh my God. How do you guys put that together? How do you program that? Like, I asked all these questions all over the time. I was so distracted. I was not a very good tester. But when I got out of high school, I was looking for a job, and since I had that exposure and gotten to meet people there, I hit up the audio director and said, "Hey, you need an intern? Do you need any help? Can I assist you in some way? Because I'd love to be a part of this still, but do something that I have a bit of skill with already." And so he kind of gave me a trial period to prove myself, and the rest is history.
That's great. I mean, right out of high school to get that kind of gig, it must have been
yeah.
It's tough because, like, musicians traditionally, it's a hard life sometimes to live. So just to be able to have that solid, and to be in an industry that you have such a passion for anyways, video games, and it probably makes it a lot easier to come into work and to crank out soundtracks all day long.
I love what I do for a living, and I always have, and I've always done both. So I've always been, the guy working, a normal work week in video games, and then by night I'm performing and recording with bands, and doing other stuff too. I eventually got into some television and commercial work and stuff like that. So, so that was fun to be able to do. Put out my own albums on the side. I have a constant need to express and create, and a lot of that comes from just a lot of people think, well, how do you keep cranking out stuff? Because, gosh, don't you do enough during a regular work week? And I tell them, well, no, because I do different things. from that, a completely different genre of music or a completely different mindset when it comes to performing. So those things give me the same gratification in different ways. And so
Yeah.
even though I might be burnt out on writing orchestra music one week, I'm just as excited to get behind the drum kit and go play some funk or some rock
Yeah.
or or go on the road and do some touring on the weekend or whatever I'm going to do. Or work on that kind of music, on my own, just even if I'm just getting ideas for my next album or whatever, and stuff like that. Like, what actually a fun thing that I got to do in the past year was, I had a Patreon page, and I actually involved that community directly in suggesting genres for every different song I would do in my next album, which is going to come out this year. So
Nice.
that was,
Nice.
something different that I, tried out that gave me, something else to draw from rather than what am I going to come up with next, and that was kind of fun.
It's interesting because sometimes, specifically for me, having constraints on your creativity can sometimes give it more of a blossom, gives you more of a directed focus to that creativity. And I feel like that probably is applicable to video games because you do have somewhat of a constraint for video game soundtracks and sounds. You find that's the case?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's, every game has its own thing that you're doing for it. And then in development, because development takes a long time, you stay in that headspace for quite a long time too. So every day you're revisiting these things. So it's nice to have a break from that, creatively, and express yourself in another way that has nothing to do with that, so that you can kind of, get a different feeling from that and then come back the next day fresh to work on still the same game, but now you've had enough of a break from it that mentally you can kind of refocus your energy and figure out what your next thing is you want to do.
And you have time to run a D&D game.
Yeah. No, I have a group that I play with, and we've done different RPGs, and taking turns DMing. So this is the first one that I've decided to DM, that I've worked on my own campaign. So that was
what game system?
5e. Yeah.
5e.
Yeah. And yeah, it's cool. I liked D&D back when it was 3.5, 4 that kind of lost me for a while, and then when it came out with 5, it was like, okay, this is better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 4 lost a lot of people.
Yeah.
I asked because me and a couple of friends of mine do a RPG podcast, and it's interesting to find people who, I mean, I bet your soundtracks for your games are your backing soundtrack.
Yeah, actually, one of my friends usually like draws up some some random soundtrack stuff to kind of complement the gameplay going on.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's fun because I've done my fair share of some fantasy games, especially with Westwood. We did such a variety of different games over the years. Stuff like Lands of Lore series and the Nox game that we did. And all of that. Pirates, Legend of Black Cat, like all of those kind of had more of a fantasy setting in terms of the scores. And yeah, so I love that kind of stuff too. I love medieval music, actually, when it comes to that vibe. Kind of more of the bardish kind of stuff, but more of the like traditional, like Elizabethan stuff and Bach stuff and 17th century stuff. All of that is something that's another kind of passion of mine, and I only get to bring it out once in a while when I'm really feeling it. But there was a track I did on my Conquering 20 Years album called Medieval Forest, and it was played with classical guitar that I hired a friend of mine to do for me, and he was amazing. And it's a very progressive piece, and it takes you on a journey, and it feels like you're in a fantasy, and that was kind of the whole point. So yeah, I love doing stuff like that when I get the opportunity.
That's awesome.
How has the turnaround time for developing a soundtrack changed over the years? Was it easier and quicker early on, or is it generally kind of a range depending on how big the game is? Is that something that you find yourself struggling with deadlines, or?
Yeah, I'm pretty efficient with time management. That's always been a strong point for me. Every project I've ever done, I think the most overwhelmed I ever was kind of in the late 90s at Westwood, where we had multiple projects firing on all cylinders at once. And I had to bring in, help to get those games done, like bringing in, like David Arkenstone for the Lands of Lore stuff, and bringing in Jared Mendelson for, help me with Tiberian Sun at the time. And, that was, all of those things were like running together. And I was just like, trying to switch my brain every other day to another game. It was just, taking its toll. Plus, iteration, was another thing I was told.
Yeah.
To go back and iterate some stuff. So yeah, that was, other than that, I've been able to keep up with all the deadlines and, be efficient with everything. So yeah, as long as I have that, I can schedule that out, and I know pretty much how long it takes me to crank something out. And I like to take my time with things more these days than I used to. Back in the earlier days, I used to just, get it done, get it out, move on to the next thing. And I like to kind of tweak things a little bit more. I like to, listen again to the next day and say, hey, did I, was I happy with that part? Do I want to change that? Could it be stronger? I like to do that. So having a deadline actually helps me kind of backtrack. How much time do I have to complete how many songs or one song or whatever? And that way I can give myself the opportunity to fine tune things a bit more.
Nice. Now, are you touring right now with your band?
Yeah. So I play drums for the Family Stone, Sly and the Family Stone. I've been performing with them since 2008. And we've got a 2-week tour we're doing here toward the end of the month on a couple of different cruises. Actually, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh wow!
And then we just do kind of dates sporadically on weekends, so it doesn't interfere with with my normal job usually. This is just one of those instances where we just happen to have a couple weeks out. But yeah, so I enjoy doing that. And as far as my own stuff goes, myself and the Tiberian Sons, we are booked to play a game convention in the Czech Republic in June, actually.
Oh, wow.
So it's called Game Access, and June 3rd, I believe, is the date of the performance. So yeah, so we're going to start gearing up for that here in the coming months as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And I definitely want to do more shows like that where opportunity arises. So hopefully, other game convention circuits and whatnot, will take interest in booking us as well. So
yeah,
I hope so too.
Yeah, can't ever have enough of your music. You do so much, and I'm constantly astonished by how much you contribute. It's awesome. I know you're coming out with Western Front.
The Great War Western Front. Yeah.
That's
really where all of our energy is right now. Because we're trying to ship that by the end of March. Yeah, that's been our game we've been working on, Petroglyph, in the last couple of years. That has a full orchestra live recorded score, and choir and everything, and it came out amazing. We recorded that in Macedonia, North Macedonia, and then we mixed it and mastered it at Abbey Road Studios, which is awesome. And yeah, I definitely went for a very traditional sound. Like I basically combined influences from classical composers of the actual era of World War I and mixed that with a John Williams approach, because that's naturally where my subconscious goes. So it definitely feels like a very traditional orchestral score in that sense, but it does, pick up influences, like I said, of the era too, and takes you through, a dramatic, dynamic sense of gameplay, and I think it complements it really well. And it was definitely a challenge to approach it in that way, because it's such a specific, historical based game. And so I really wanted to do that justice as much as possible.
Very cool. It sounds like you put a lot of care and a lot of thought into the source material and where it comes from, and that's really, really respectful. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, even though I was doing my own original score, like I said, I wanted to kind of pay homage to the era, and also do it in a way that felt like it was still a soundtrack. Yeah, and it was completely like all of it is live. There's no sample, enhancement. There's no overdub stuff. It was all the musicians were there. It was a huge orchestra,
That's
77
awesome.
piece orchestra, 25-piece choir.
Now, is that a completely different writing process to do something orchestral with choir and all the live instruments? Is the writing process, is that tougher?
Yeah.
Would you say, or is it?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine so. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you're dealing with all of these different instruments that have their own voice, and
Right.
a lot of the decision making comes down to which voice do I want to use for this melody or this chord or this part, or how many of those do I want to stack together? What do I want to feature in this section? And you play with those ideas as you compose, and so it does take longer because in my mind I'm trying out different things, and sometimes physically in the demo mode of what I've got on the computer, shifting things around all the time to say, okay, do I want the flute to do this? Do I want the trumpet to do this? Do I want the strings to do this? Do I want nothing there? Do I want to and as rapidly as I can think of it, I'm trying it out, and then trying something else out and playing some different chords. Where does it need to go now? And try another part. And do I want it to be action? Do I want it to be ambient? Do I want it to evoke sadness or intensity or whatever? It takes a lot of energy mentally to do this on a daily basis when you're doing an hour's worth of orchestral score. It's quite a lot. So yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm very happy with how everything came out. And I was so biased after a while. Like I got through it and I was done with it. And I'm like, God, I hope this is good.
It's been so long.
Everybody's cool with it, and everybody seems to be happy with it, and I'm happy with it, I guess. But I've been so close to it for so long now. You just kind of get like a little bit frazzled with in terms of what you think about it. So when I had a break from it, and then I eventually went and had it recorded by the orchestra, like I had a bit of validation, from some of them there, the conductor and some of the musicians that were involved. They're like, this is a really challenging score. This is really cool. This is not what we get every day. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I hope that's a good thing. They're like, oh yeah,
That's good. Yeah.
I'm like, all right, cool. So yeah, everybody was kind of picking out some of the influences even of what I was going for. So I was impressed that came across. It actually resonated with people who know about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I think we've had a good interview here. I really appreciate your time and your contribution to my life. I think it might sound a little weird, but I've been listening to you for so long. This is a dream come true, and I thank you so much for doing this with us.
Wow, that's great to hear. I'm thankful, like I said, for the support and for listening all these years. I appreciate that very much. And I'm glad that my contributions to music in general has meant something to all of the fans out there, and including yourself. And because here's the thing that I think is the deeper part of it, and that is that as creators, as musicians, composers, we don't choose what people like. They do,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when I tell you stories about the past of how I didn't think it would amount to anything, or whatever, it was just a score and who cares, that's really just me saying, like, I don't have a say in that. I'm just doing what's asked of me and what I'm feeling, and I hope that it works well, and that's all you can really hope for. At the end of the day, when people say, no, this is my favorite soundtrack, or this is my favorite tune that you did in a game or whatever, like, I'm like, I'm very grateful to hear that, because that means that appealed to their personal taste, that was their choice, that they gravitated to them in some way, it meant something to them. And so I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. I've been a very musical person ever since I was a kid, so it's always resonated with me, video game music, especially when I was very young. And so that's kind of the impetus of this podcast all these years later, is just showing that respect, making sure you guys get that honor, to let that, your music changes people and helps people. And yeah.
Music's a healing thing, man.
Music is a healing thing. Couldn't
Yeah.
say it better.
Yes.
John, would you like to say anything before we go?
Just to echo Mike, I really appreciate you coming in. And yeah, like you said, the music of Command and Conquer has been playing throughout my head for the past 28 years. And yeah, anything that I've heard of yours has always been awesome. And just the fact that you are still doing it, you're still killing it. Yeah, it's
inspiring.
very impressive. And yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sure.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me. It's great to, great to be able to talk about this stuff with people who are, equally passionate about it. And, it's a joy to continue to do this as a career for me, so as long as I still have it in me, I'm going to keep it happening.
Well, we look forward to that.
Awesome.
Thank you again, Frank.
Okay. Take care.
You too.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please rate and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. Also, check out Magus Media's other podcast, This Is Not Happening, another X-Files podcast for complete episode breakdowns, insightful banter, and inane babble. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.